Before we let you go, in the pre-interview before we started recording, you had mentioned the possibility of another hellhole in Prague behind the Prague Castle, I believe. And it relates to Drahomira, which, just to quickly remind our listeners, I did tell the story in the first episode of St. Ludmilla and how Drahomira was jealous of her and sent somebody to strangle the grandmother of her child. So that's just a little bit of background there. So what can you tell us about this other hole that's supposedly in Prague itself?
Right around the castle, there's just like dozens and dozens of stories. There's a book called 77 Legends of Prague. And if you open up, they got a map. And just like right in an old town and right by Prague Castle, there's just like 6 dozen, like in one town square. You just like, oh, that building, let me tell you a story. That building, let me tell you a story. That building, let me tell you a story. The oldest story, there's one little circular thing where there's like, it's hard not to go on tangents because it's between Chernov Castle and then Schwarzenberg is up the road. And then there's Loretta, which was a replica of something in Italy, which is a replica of, well, there's the Santa Casa, which was like where the Virgin Mary got the message from an angel that she's pregnant with Jesus. There's a replica of that in Prague, right next to the Hole to Hell. By chance, this is like centuries later. But the oldest story is going way back to pagan days. And if you see pictures, I don't know if you guys talked about this or mentioned this little fact, but back when like people were illiterate in the Middle Ages, they still had their myths and legends that they would either pass on orally or kind of through comics. Like if you saw a picture, Drahomira and Ludmilla, you'd see them a lot in churches and stuff. Because Ludmilla is like Saint Ludmilla, and everybody involved in that whole generation, it's Saint Wenceslav, that's him, that's Ludmilla's kid. And Drahomira tried to kill Wenceslav, and she did kill Ludmilla and all that stuff. But when you see Drahomira, she's shown often in the old depictions, she has like those goat legs, like half demonic. And the reason she's shown that way is not because she's like the devil, but because she's a pagan. So this is like 10th century. This is like Drahomira was the cutoff date. Like she's the pagan and Ludmilla and Wenceslav are the first real Christians.
Right.
So there's a bunch of drama around that. And right where the castle was, that was even an old pagan site. So where the Prague Castle is today, the Prague Castle, that was an old pagan site. That's, 1,000+ years old, 1,000 years of history. It goes prehistoric. I mean, there's Neanderthal remains there. So who knows? Prague is just awesome. But anyways, everything's going bad for Drahomira, and Christianity is taking hold, and her ploy to poison Wenceslav fails. And so one final last-ditch effort, she says, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice myself in the old pagan cemetery where my forefathers were buried and everything. And that, the self-sacrifice, will be enough of a push that the old gods will come back. Okay? So the story goes. She calls her driver and they get in a carriage and she's like, drive me to the cemetery. And the driver is just like, because Drahomira, she has a reputation of like being a sorceress, witch, like evil person. And the driver, by the way, he just took the job because it pays well, but he's actually one of those newfangled Christian guys.
Okay.
And he is like scared out of his mind. He doesn't want to go to the pagan side. He doesn't want to drive Drahomira. And she is like, lightning bolts are coming out of her eyes. And he's just not down with this. And so they're driving away from the castle. And then right where this Chernin Palace is today, they take a right turn, and between Chernin Palace and Loretta, there's this one circular, in cobblestones, it's like this circular pattern. But now imagine, instead of that, this road going out to, out of Prague. But there was an old, one of the first churches right where Chernin Palace is today, and they were just starting to have their mass or something when the driver rode by. And he was like scared out of his mind. So he just stopped the wagon, jumped out and ran into the church. And Drahomira was like, she just lost it. She started cursing and yelling. And the guy was telling like, oh, Drahomira's going to drive to the cemetery and sacrifice herself. And this was a bad thing. And people in the church were afraid because Drahomira was one of the most powerful women in the country. Pagan Bohemia was very matriarchal. Like Drahomira was the old boss, like the empress. And they were just kind of fearing for their lives now, and she could have just burned the whole church, had them all killed. So they start praying for their lives. The whole church starts like praying together and starts praying for their safety. And lo and behold, the earth opens up and the whole street just opens into a whole cavern, into an abyss, and whole carriage, horses, and Drahomira just fall into nothing and are engulfed in flames and smoke. Now, apparently, according to legend, that volcanic little activity. And here's where I want to like talk to a geologist, because you have sources from like the 1500s saying, oh, yeah, people make a wide berth around that thing because it's steaming and smoking and it smells like sulfur. Okay, like 500 years later. And could have been some vent, maybe, I don't know. However, even today, it's like this weird hill. And if you look at it, it's like there's a parking lot on the top. It's just weird. There's a statue to the third defenestration. Beneshelf was thrown out of a window by communists. But other than that, it's like weird. It's like, yeah, so even now, the architecture is off because they avoided it. It was cursed. Now, again, really? Was it? Or is that just a legend? Like, I need to ask a check from like 500 years ago and just say like, hey, when you walk down this road, do you make a wide berth the way that 77 Legends says that, or McGee's Ghost Tours says that, or, but why is that circle there? Why is there a drop off? It is kind of weird.
Is that the accepted form of death historically for Drahomir?
I guess so.
Wow.
That's one of the legends. I don't know of any other. There must be, but I guess so.